Before I retired, one of my biggest fears wasn't money, it was boredom. I didn't have a clear picture of what retirement would look like, but I had this vague anxiety that I might just sit around and slowly waste away. I was used to operating at what felt like Mach speed. My days were packed meetings, deadlines, problem solving, side projects, constant simulation. The idea of going from that pace to something resembling a crawl felt disconcerting. At the time, we were living in Texas, and I remember thinking, sure, I could play disc golf, but only for a few hours a day. Half the year, it's too hot to be outside afternoon. So what was I going to do with the rest of the day? There are a lot of hours between breakfast and dinner. In my imagination, boredom looked like watching too much television, scrolling on my phone, taking naps out of a lack of purpose, wandering through the house without direction. I couldn't yet conceive of the idea I talked about in episode 1, that curiosity alone might just be enough. All I could picture was the absence of momentum. And that's what really scared me. Part of the fear was classic boredom. And I know what that feels like. When I was younger, I worked at a print shop. And occasionally we had to collate large stacks of documents for customers. Standing there, sorting page after page into identical piles hour after hour was painful in a way that only true boredom can be. It felt like time was dragging itself across the floor. I didn't want retirement to feel like that. But there was also another layer to the fear that was harder to name at the time. I was afraid of losing my edge. Work had provided maybe 80 or 90% of my daily stimulation. It was fast-paced and often beyond capacity. There was always more drama, more urgency, and more pressure. I worked weekends. I carried projects home in my head. I delivered things that I felt impossible. It was invigorating. It occupied nearly all of my focus. I was addicted to problem solving, and I probably still am. For example, right now, I have a squirrel problem in my attic. Instead of calling a professional, I've spent weeks trying to solve it myself. Traps, one-way doors, talking radios, video surveillance. Nothing has worked yet, but I'm still at it. There is something deeply satisfying about trying to crack a problem. In my career, that dopamine cycle was constant. Write a line of code that works, dopamine hit. Release a new product feature, dopamine hit. Design breakthrough, dopamine hit. It was thrilling. I worried that without that steady stream of challenge and feedback, my brain might dull, that my technical edge would fade, that I would somehow lose the drive that had defined me for decades. So yes, I was afraid of boredom. In the first month after retiring, that fear showed up. Everything seemed to come to a screeching halt. It was almost painful at first, like breaking a leg. When you're forced to stop running, your body doesn't immediately know what to do with the stillness. There were mornings when I woke up and realized there were no meetings, no one-on-ones, no travel, no pressure building in the background. For a brief moment, I thought, uh-oh. The monotony threatened to creep in. A typical early retirement weekday looked simple. Sleeping in as late as you want, make coffee, sit in the quiet of the morning, listen to a podcast or the news. I would still go to my workstation with the big monitor, but instead of managing teams or shipping products, I was just dorking around, clicking through ideas, reading or thinking. There was a sense of spaciousness that felt unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel like boredom if you're used to the constant intensity. But something interesting happened. The initial discomfort didn't last for too long. What replaced boredom wasn't some grand structured master plan. It was a collection of ordinary things that slowly filled the day in a different way. planning travel, reading books that I had postponed for years, cleaning the house without rushing, walking with my wife in the middle of the day, playing disc golf without watching the clock, watching a movie on a random Tuesday afternoon just because we could, cooking, projects around the house, volunteer work at church. None of those activities individually replicated the adrenaline of corporate problem solving, but together they created something steadier. What surprised me most was how much I began to crave unstructured time. It took a little getting used to, but once I adjusted, it felt deeply freeing to be my own boss. No one was dictating my calendar. No one owned my weekends. My body could rest and recover. And in middle age, that matters more than you think. And curiosity came back. Remember that curiosity you had as a child with no responsibilities? If the first few weeks felt like learning to walk again after breaking a leg, the months that followed felt like learning not just to run, but to fly. When your time is unconstrained, your mind begins to wander in productive ways. You notice things. You think more deeply. You pursue interests without asking whether they are profitable. And looking back, I don't think boredom was the real issue. Instead, it was the loss of significance. At work, I was needed. Decisions depended on me. People relied on me. That constant validation had been fused with my sense of purpose. And when that disappeared, I mistook the quiet for emptiness. But quiet is not emptiness. It's space. If you're afraid you'll be bored in retirement, you're probably underestimating what you're capable of when your time is unconstrained. Boredom may show up briefly. In my experience, it's transitional though. It's your nervous system recalibrating after years of high-speed momentum. In the long term, I haven't found retirement boring at all. Instead, I've found it life-giving. There's nothing quite like the feeling of owning your time. When your hours are truly yours, you begin to discover parts of yourself that had been buried under obligation. It's not that every day feels electric. It's that I'm not racing through them anymore. I'm just living them. If this kind of content connects with you, consider subscribing or sharing a perspective in the comments. I'm always interested in how others are thinking through these questions. And as always, thank you for tuning in to John Dawson Retirement.